I can't stand the Tony Ferguson slander anymore. I understand the recent turn of events in his fight career, but a lot of you don't know that he really was the boogeyman in the lightweight division. I'm not kidding about the don't know part. There has been an insane influx of new fans to the UFC post 2020, and that's a good thing. The more eyes, the better, and since the UFC promotion has only been around for 30 years this year, it's extremely impressive to have the fan base they have. But that caused a lot of new fans to miss this UFC golden era. 2010 to 2020. Don't argue with me in the comments saying, oh, the golden era is in the 90s and 2000s. This is my opinion because during this time period, the UFC seemed to evolve in all aspects of their company. Better branding, better production, better fighters, and bigger stars. There was a time when Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, and Brock Lesnar were all fighting at the same time. And speaking of Brock Lesnar, he was actually Tony Ferguson's coach back on the 13th season of The Ultimate Fighter. Brock gave Tony the most respect out of all the fighters on the show, and he had only good things to say about him.
Tony's a guy that very focused. He's got a system down in his head, and Tony has been doing a lot of training on his own.
Tony ended up winning that season of The Ultimate Fighter by knockout, then proceeded to win 2 more fights before losing a decision against Michael Johnson. How can we blame him for that? Because even though MJ is notoriously inconsistent as a fighter, he's got some big wins like Gleison Tibau, Edson Barbosa, Dustin Poirier by knockout. He KO'd. Anyways, this is where things became crazy for Tony, and this is truly when the boogeyman came alive. After his loss to Johnson, Tony Ferguson would end up going on a 12-fight win streak, all of these being exciting performances where Tony looked like he wasn't even a human, as if pain didn't affect him. He actually has a fascinating outlook on the concept of pain.
When you're hurt, how do you feel? You lay down, right? When I'm hurt, I love that feeling because it's real. Happiness could be fake, crying could be fake, but pain, that's real.
His 12-fight win streak record leaves him currently as a number 9 in the top 10 win streaks in UFC history. I mean, take a good look on everyone else who is on this list. Tony Ferguson simply didn't have a padded record unlike other fighters. Take a look here. Gleison Tibau, the man who actually beat Khabib, Josh Thompson, the first dude to KO Nate Diaz, Edson Barbosa, Spinny Man, Rafael dos Anjos, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone. There's one guy missing from this list, which was at the time the most anticipated and speculated and any other aided word you can think of that involves the what if factor. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. I already know what you're thinking. Oh, Khabib would smash Tony. It wouldn't be close. It'd be a wash. I think that... Silence. It's extremely easy to make the assumption that Khabib would mop the floor with them after he's on a 5-fight losing skid, but if you go back in time to the days when this fight was actually supposed to happen 5 different times, you'd be singing a different tune. And you heard me correctly, this fight was booked on 5 different occasions. The first being in 2015 when Khabib pulled out with a rib injury. In 2016 they tried again only for Tony to pull out with an injury. Then they tried again after Conor dipped out to make some big boy bucks fighting Floyd, so they attempted to set up the interim belt, but Khabib felt ill during the weight cut. The UFC decided to set it up 2 years later in 2018, and truly, unbelievably, Tony tripped over a wire at one of the press conferences and tore his fibular collateral ligament. How insane is that? The final time it got booked was in 2020, and when everything seems perfect, the world had to shut down due to a certain little predicament we all got in, and the fight was canceled. It's pretty unbelievable. It sounds like a bad joke, and although like a bad joke, nothing is funny about it, it's not a joke for the level of disappointment fans had. I'm not playing when I say that this was the most anticipated matchup ever. You can let me know in the comments a bigger potential fight in the UFC. I just don't believe it exists. In 2015, Khabib was only 5 fights into the promotion. Could you name me anyone he beat? If you said Rafael dos Anjos, that's valid, you're valid, and that's tough competition. If you said Gleison Tibau, as I said before, Gleison actually beat him. You can't name the other guys because you don't know them, and that's fine, but fighters truly get judged for their abilities when they face stiff competition, and Tony's track record was well proven above the Eagles, and like an eagle, this fight just seemed to fly away from us and never come back. And even though Tony still had some juicy wins in the meantime, all good things must come to an end. Justin Gaethje, 2020. The beginning of the end. Justin had actually declined the first time to fight Tony due to his coach Trevor Whitman not giving him the green flag, and that was probably for the best because even though having a short notice fight is already a bad idea, a short notice fight versus Ferguson is a terrible one. Tony was a fighter that other fighters actively ducked, so declining a last-minute fight against him was wise. Once the fight was finally booked and ready, I don't think anyone could have expected what happened that night. It was a one-sided beatdown. Other than the double uppercut moment where Tony dropped Justin at the end of the round, it was a masterclass performance from Justin. Someone on Reddit said, "Man, who knows what would have happened if there was another minute left in that round?" And another guy said, quote, "The last impressive moment of Tony's career." And I would make a joke about this guy being an average Reddit user, but I don't know exactly when he commented this because even though the Oliveira and Dariush fights after were total washes, in his fight with Michael Chandler, it looked like it was old Tony again. Tony easily won that first round and was extremely aggressive, something we haven't seen since the Justin fight, only for in the second round for Tony to be on the receiving end of one of the most brutal, vicious, and quite literally terrifying knockouts we have ever seen. Seeing Tony out cold like that was something I thought I'd never see, considering the hammers he took in the Justin fight, but I guess a firm front kick in the face from the UFC's most explosive athlete would most likely shut anyone's lights out. After that, he lost in a fight versus Nate Diaz, which was an extremely last-minute replacement due to Hamza having an epic weight miss moment by a whopping 8 pounds.
Not that bad.
Tony was snaked from the start. When you hear any fighter is on a 5-fight losing skid, it's not a good sign, but Tony Ferguson isn't your average fighter, and take a good hard look at the guys he has lost to. Gaethje, Oliveira, Dariush, Chandler, and Diaz. All the lightweights are the top 5 guys in the world, and Nate Diaz is, well, Nate Diaz. Remember this, Nate Diaz almost prevented Leon Edwards from becoming the champ right now. Take that as you will. It hurts to see what has happened to Tony. Fighting is just so vicious and brutal, but seeing this happen to a guy who looked invincible at one point is not only odd, but heartbreaking. The cold hard truth is that the damage Tony took from the fight versus Justin seems to have literally changed his whole life. Fighters say they leave a piece of themselves in the octagon, but in Tony's case, I think he literally left a chunk. And that's not supposed to be a joke, and it's not supposed to be funny, it's the sad reality. Not only did he receive an abundant amount of damage, his fight style had completely changed since. He was a lot more hesitant to throw and be the aggressor, and he would just find himself getting grinded out by these young, hungrier guys who have never had a chance at the belt. All of a sudden, when we see this old version of Tony come back in the Chandler fight, it gets stopped by a "see you at the top" kick that will forever be embedded in UFC promotions and videos. Tony has a fight at the end of this month versus Bobby Green, and I'm predicting a retirement, win or loss. I don't want to see that, and I certainly don't want to see him lose again, but I feel mentally he's already 1 foot out the door, and that's okay. He's certainly going to be a Hall of Famer, he already became an interim champion, and the truth is, if he had retired after his fight with Cowboy, similar to how Khabib retired after Justin, Tony would have been the one that got away like Khabib. Everyone's time comes, and it's a tough thing to know when to leave the sport, especially when you've devoted your whole life to it, but sometimes leaving is the best thing you can do. And whether Tony wins or loses his fight versus Bobby, he will forever be a legend in my book, and I will never forget prime Tony Ferguson.